How did you hear about Dr. Jody, Kristen?
A colleague at work knew I was very concerned about my 7-year-old daughter, and he asked me if I was interested in other options. I said I'm willing to take a look at anything, and so that's how I came to Dr. Jody's office.
Okay. You mentioned he was concerned about your daughter's condition. Can you
Sure.
say what is your daughter's condition and what you were
Sure.
experiencing with your daughter?
My daughter's 7 years old, and when she was in kindergarten, a teacher brought me in and said, I think she's having seizures. We went and had an EEG done. Sure enough, she did have seizures. So for an 18-month period, we had her on medication. And I had a funny feeling about it because nobody was really checking up on her. So I insisted on another EEG because I never saw the seizures in the first place. She did not have grand mal seizures. She had what are considered absence seizures, meaning the child stares off into space and looks like they're having in a hypnotic trance is what it is. And so I went in for another EEG about 6 months ago, and they said that she was still having seizures. Matter of fact, she was having quite a few seizures, which means the medication was failing because this was the second medication. So at this point, they started talking to me about other options for her. I started doing my own research and realized that about the only thing they had to offer me was probably another pill or worst case scenario, brain surgery. And the thought of having my beautiful 7-year-old go under the knife was just not going to happen. So I started looking at every other option I possibly could, and that's how I came to see Dr. Jody. Well, first of all, they wouldn't give me a lot of answers. But being the way I am, I started doing my own research. You know, the World Wide Web can be a bad thing because sometimes we can know a little bit more than we need to know. And when I did the research on the hemispherectomy, I'm probably going to say that wrong, the gist of it is they're going to take brain tissue out of your child's brain. And considering that the brain has 52 different regions in it, when you remove one part of the brain, you really don't know how it's going to affect the other regions. Certainly there's many people that supposedly have had success with this, and I'm sure that in a worst case scenario, you know, there's times people have to do that. But to me, before I even had that discussion, I wanted to try everything else because what I find, because I've been to a lot of doctors for my kids, and once you get in that office, the train has left the tracks and it's going in a certain direction. And they have a way of making you feel that this is the only option, and that as a mother, if you don't pursue this option, you're negligent. And I just really wanted to make sure that I was taking a look at the big picture because it's very hard to not get really emotional about something like that. And I have all the respect in the world for people that have done that and had good results. But I just really didn't have a lot of confidence in the medical care I had received up to that time. And I just didn't really feel in my gut like that was the right choice for our family. At that point, they're not really telling you you are going to have surgery. They're telling you you're being pre-evaluated for surgery. But when I looked at all the research, and I even had a friend who got me on some medical journals that she had access to because she's in the medical profession, I just realized they don't really have much else to offer me. They're rather going to talk to you about pills, or they're going to talk to you about, you know, cutting into your child's skull. And I just didn't think that that was going to work really well. And I just had this feeling that there was more to this than what I was being told. And I will be forever grateful that I had that sixth sense, or what I call mother's intuition, and I went with it because I really think in the end that and God are what saved my daughter. So I'm very thankful that we made it to Dr. Jody's office.
They were pre-evaluating.
Well, see, that's the key thing here. Nobody tells you what they're doing. Unless you're really pushy like I am, and you do a lot of research, you wouldn't necessarily know that. You would just walk in there and think, hey, they're going to start talking to me about a different medication or some new diet that's come up, or there must be something else. And you know, a lot of these people, they're really wonderful people that have spent many years getting educated in what they do. But what I realized through the issues I've been through with my two kids is it's not their fault. They just don't really have anything to offer me. So if I want things to be different, I have to advocate for my own health and for the health of my children, and I have to be proactive. And so that's what our journey has consisted of. Supposedly they do remove a large piece of the brain. I think it's pretty complicated. It depends on the type of seizure and everything.
Okay, because a hemispherectomy is actually half of the brain.
Oh, dear God.
That's
Yeah.
exactly
Half of the brain, yeah.
If you could describe the amplitude of this procedure, hemispherectomy.
I started reading up on hemispherectomies. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but my understanding of it is they remove half of a person's brain. I guess certain parts of the brain can regenerate, but who knows when you take part of it out what's going to really happen. And then something really odd happened. I was at a trade show halfway through this process, and I ran into a 21-year-old girl, and we somehow got on the subject of epilepsy, which, by the way, if you're having seizures, you have epilepsy. A lot of people don't know that. And she tells me, oh, when I was about 7, I had these seizures. I went through this. We were on medication for years. And then when I was about 12, they weren't working anymore. And I ended up having surgery, and gee, yay, everything's great now. I can even drive. And I only have seizures half the time now. And I said, hold up here. I said, excuse me, you're how old? She says, I'm 21. I said, this happened when you were how old? Oh, I was like 12-ish when I had the surgery. I said, so you mean you still have seizures? She said, oh yeah, but they're nowhere near as bad as they used to be. I mean, I was becoming non-functional. They told my mother I was going to become a vegetable. And I just stopped in my tracks because somewhere in my mind I had thought, well, if you do this surgery, it's the radical cure-all, right? So that means my kid will never have another seizure again, will never have a problem. And I realized right then and there that these really radical procedures are being done to people to, quote, get improvement. They aren't even necessarily finding a cure. And that's when I kind of added it all up in my head and said, shouldn't I be looking for the root cause? Shouldn't I be looking for the solution? I tried the medication route, and that was a Band-Aid. And in retrospect, looking back, I feel those medications gave my daughter some issues in school, cognitively speaking, and I think they caused a whole new set of problems. So I decided, no, let's use logic here, and let's deal with what the root cause is and see if there is a way to solve for that problem, because I am not putting my kid through that so that she can, quote, have an improvement in the amount of seizures she has. And keep in mind, my daughter, again, I want to reiterate, my daughter didn't have grand mal seizures. She wasn't on the ground shaking. She wasn't non-functional. I mean, nobody would have even ever known she was having seizures. But the issue is when somebody is having a seizure, they're having a brain attack. And if the brain is attacked millions of times through the day for seconds at a shot, you know, you're causing damage overall. So you do have to do something about it. And it is a severe problem, and there's still a lot that's not known about seizures. Yes, we were told to go to a specialist who dealt in nothing but pediatric epilepsy. We were sent to UCLA. We did our homework. We were told by doctors that we knew if it was their child, they'd go to UCLA and nowhere else. I couldn't get an appointment for 4 months. I was starting to feel desperate, frankly, because I'd been told to take her off the medication. And in my mind at that time, I thought, if I take my child off this medication, my kid's going to be having seizures all day long. It's going to be causing all kinds of problems. I assume I was being more dramatic than I needed to be about it, but that was my thinking at the time. But a strange thing happened. We decided to come and see Dr. Joddy. First of all, he actually, well, I've never had any doctor spend that much time with me ever. It was almost to the point of, okay, are we going yet? I mean, he was very thorough, and he explained what he was doing. He took the time to educate me. I really, really, really appreciated that. He also treated me like I had a brain and like I wasn't an idiot. I really appreciated that even more. And I was in the room the entire time, and I could see, my husband and I could see with our own eyes. He would perform a test. There would be a not so great result. He would explain to us what it meant. He would do the brain-based treatments. He would redo the test, and I could see improvements with my own eyes. I would say after 5 to 7 treatments, I started seeing some real changes in Alexis. After that, it was probably 15 treatments total over a couple of months, maybe 3 months. And then I started realizing I don't think she's having seizures anymore. But this is the important part. I didn't really ever see the seizures. They mostly happened at school. So I was often thinking, how do I know this is working? It was very confusing to me because I wanted to have conclusive proof. So when it came time to go to UCLA, I kept the appointment. So this was fast forward 4 months. I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to see what's going on here. And what they wanted to do with Alexis is they wanted to admit her for a 3-day monitoring EEG, which is where they take the child into the hospital. They stay 24 hours a day, they put the electrodes on their head, and they monitor their brain activity. At the end of the 3rd day, the doctor comes in and says, well, we think we should do an MRI. We don't really see anything yet, but we're going to do an MRI because there is a little bit of unusual activity in the back of the brain, and we want to see what's going on there. She comes out of the MRI, and the next thing I know, my husband and I are in the hospital room. There's 8 doctors crowded in the room. I guess we were a teaching opportunity because it was all the interns and residents were there. And they said, we're completely baffled. We don't know what to tell you. And I said, what on earth do you mean? And they said, she doesn't have any seizures. This child has no seizures. And I said, are you sure? Because, you know, this is a very low stress environment. She mostly has them at school. Maybe she's just been really relaxed here in the hospital and that's why she hasn't had any. The doctors themselves said that's highly unlikely because you would expect, we've tried to stimulate the seizures while she's here. We've done certain things to try to make that happen. If a child's having seizures, in our professional opinion, over a 72-hour period, you would see them. I said, well, okay, since we had the previous 2 EEGs at a different hospital, did you get all the tests and everything, the files from there? And they said, yes, we did. I said, well, can you tell me conclusively that she was having seizures at some time? And they said, oh yeah, she was definitely, you know, we looked over those, she was definitely having seizures. I said, so just so I understand, she was having seizures, but she does not now have seizures, plus she's taking no medication now. So wouldn't you expect she'd be having even worse seizures? And they said, yes, we would expect that. And so they said, well, all we can say is you're one of the lucky ones. We don't know why you're here. And they said, we would suggest you go home and keep on doing whatever it is you're doing. And we'll see you in a few months just to check up on her. I tell every mother I know that's dealing with issues, whether it's ADD, autism, seizures, you name it. There's a lot of kids out there right now that have some challenges. If your gut is telling you that something is wrong, and all the professionals, the medical professionals, the education professionals are telling you that, you know, basically you're neurotic, please don't listen to them. You know, God gave mothers intuition for a reason. It's there to protect you and you and your family. Use it. And the second thing I would say is keep an open mind and do your own research. Do your homework. I think there are times when I trusted medical professionals too much because I put a lot of, I happen to be somebody who respects education a lot. So I just always assumed that if you were more educated than I was and you went to some really great schools and had some really great letters after your name, you earned that reputation and you must know more than I did. So I'm going to listen to what you say. And what I've learned is that nobody knows their child the way a mother does. You know when something isn't right. So I would say do your own research and advocate for your own health care. And there are lots of contemporary medical treatments out there. Just because you haven't heard about it, or your mother hasn't heard about it, or your brother or your best friend hasn't heard about it, doesn't mean that it doesn't have meaning. Come and find out for yourself, because you might be missing something, and that thing that you're missing can make all the difference in the world for your family. Even after just 7 treatments, so we weren't even done with our brain-based treatments yet, I started noticing little things, like for instance, we had moved a year and a half before, and I had spent a year and a half trying to teach Alexis the new address and the new phone number. I tried everything, and she would learn something, and she would have no recall 4 days later. And this was something they would bring up at school. They would say, she has a concept, she tests well on a concept, but then when we go back to review a concept, it's as if she never learned it. And they were starting to bring up to me that they had concerns about her academically because of that. And then when she did get something, it would just take her a really, really long time to have recall. So since I was doing some pretty long trips to Dr. Jotti's office, we did a 3.5-hour round trip to get out here because it was worth it to us. I had a lot of time to practice that phone number and that address. And what was really interesting to me was not that she learned it in the car ride here, but that it would be 2 weeks later and I hadn't said anything to her to review it, and she still remembered what the address is, and that continues. That was a big change for us. The other thing was she just simply seemed more lively. She was always a very compliant child. You know, she's a very good little girl, but almost sometimes a little bit too quiet. And a lot of people have commented that she seems a lot livelier, charismatic. That's been a big change. The other thing that I've noticed is she would on occasion have emotional outbursts where she would get kind of emotional about things in a way that didn't always seem that it was appropriate. In other words, her amount of upset for what it was that was upsetting her just didn't seem to mesh. And a lot of that seems to be gone. She just generally seems like a more happy-go-lucky kid. And when it comes to her schoolwork, she's made huge strides. And we don't seem to be having as many processing issues as we once did. So we're just very pleased. And we just want, at this point, we're wondering what we can do to optimize what we've learned here, because from here, you know, the sky's the limit now. We know what we can do about it, and it's wonderful. We had like the initial 7 treatments, and that was pretty intensive. And then after that, we were coming, maybe once a week for a month or 2. And at this point, we're seeing the doctor every 2 to 3 weeks for maintenance. And we see a day when we probably will only be here once every few months, although we will miss Dr. Joddy when that happens. But it was intense for a short period of time, and that's what I would tell everyone. And looking back, you have to look at certain stages in your life and say, okay, for 3 months of my life, this is going to be really intense, but this isn't going to be forever. It's kind of like when you have a brand new baby. Those first few months, you think you're never going to get sleep again. But you realize later on, you know, that really wasn't a big part of my life. It was a small part. And I have to say it was absolutely worth all the effort that it required, and considering what the alternative was, this was nothing in comparison. And it's just kind of frightening to me that sometimes people need to look at what they're thinking of doing when you're talking about having surgery for your child and all the upheaval that comes from that, from having the actual surgery. And then what about the effects that come for years after a surgery and the issues you have to deal with? It's like people are willing to put up with that, but they aren't willing to go see a doctor a couple times a week. We all need to really kind of rethink how we're doing this medical thing, because there are other options and they work, and I'm just so thankful to Dr. Joddy, and that's why I wanted to come here today and be interviewed for this, is to say thank you so much. We're very grateful.